Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Nona from thealignedlover.com. Here is the spring installment in my 12 seasonal color exploration series where I create collages and cultivate different photos to give you a more grounded experience of the seasonal colors so that they aren't just isolated shades in a palette. And hopefully this helps you recognize the different qualities of the subseasons and identify them in real life. Before we begin, just remember that colors don't have a binary effect on you, and by that I mean there's a spectrum in terms of how colors look on you. On one end, they can look phenomenal. Towards the middle of that spectrum, they're okay, and on the other ends, they can make you look a little bit unhealthy, so keep that in mind. All right, so let's start off with the reds and pinks of spring, starting off with Bright Spring. Bright Spring is in between winter and spring, so it still has that high contrast from the winter season, but we're seeing a lot more warmth, some really good inspiration for Bright Spring reds and pinks can be found in very richly pigmented fruit, very ripe dragon fruit, bright strawberries, currants, and flowers that really embody this subseason include bright poppies and very bright magenta flowers. Moving on to true spring, losing that slight coolness because there's no proximity to winter. We have more juicy but relatively gentle colors. Tomatoes, grapefruit, watermelon, really fun red and pink cocktails are good inspiration for this subseason. And finally, with light spring, the white value takes over, not as much contrast as even true spring. So not a lot of true or highly pigmented reds, scarlets, and crimsons in this subseason. So there's more pinks, salmony, orangey pinks as well. So looking at some spring natives, we can see that the bright spring natives look so beautiful in these punchy, high contrast, very, I would say, almost electric reds and hot pinks. Hot reds and hot pinks are a good way to kind of describe these colors. True spring, a little bit more gentle, not as high contrast, not as high chroma, still extremely warm and radiant. And then with light spring, that lightness takes over. All right, moving on to the spring oranges and yellows. Bright spring, again, we're having that animated, very electric, vivacious kind of saturation. It's punchy, it's high contrast. And moving on to true spring, the contrast and that chroma get a little gentler, and fruit inspiration is really at its peak here. Citrus, mango, pineapple, a lot of juices are really good inspiration for this subseason. And finally, for light spring, again, white value, that lower contrast, softer rose petals, salmon skin or flesh, lighter flamingos, softer flowers. These are good inspirations for oranges and yellows. All right, looking at some examples, the bright spring yellows are a little bit more electric looking. The orange just leans a little bit more neon relative to true spring yellows and oranges, which are extremely fruity, just very juicy, spring-like and radiant. And then with light spring, just very soft, ethereal colors. The faintest touch of hue can look so impactful on these natives because they are very, very light. All right, now let's move on to spring subseason greens. These greens in bright spring are zesty, bright, saturated. Think of high contrast cocktails with different garnishes like really bright lemon zest and mint, even dark cucumber skin, very bright watermelon rind, green mangoes, almost fluorescently bright leaves. True spring, a little more gentle, think kiwis, green apples, less ripe, or I would say more ripe green mangoes because they have a little bit more of that yellowness to them. And finally, light spring, soft green grapes that have that kind of like grape must on the surface that creates that kind of fuzzy effect, soft kiwi, soft cherry moya, honeydew melon. And for the examples, bright spring, punchy, bright, vivacious greens look so stunning on them. True springs look so warm and radiant in these, again, gentler greens that still have that freshness, but more of that yellow undertone. And then light springs with that very heavy influence of white value. They look so, I would say, fairy or elf-like, very magical. And finally, for spring blues and purples, starting with bright spring, we have more depth to the purples and blues. They can handle more of that darkness compared to the other spring subseasons, but brightness and saturation are really at the forefront. For true spring, we're seeing lots of beautiful flowers, lilacs, forget-me-nots, lavenders, really, really gorgeous selections. And then light spring blues and purples remind me of blue eggs, really light hydrangeas, and macarons. Anything that is kind of like a pastry really reminds me of light spring. And for the examples, bright spring, looking very punchy, bright high contrast, and these gorgeous, I would say, electric but warm shades. If bright winter is like cold electricity, bright spring is like electricity plus sunshine, if that makes sense. True spring looking so golden, so radiant in these gentler bluish purples, warmer blues, warmer purples, and then light spring with the light aqua, light eggshell blues, very soft, slightly warm sky blues are absolutely gorgeous on them. So let's just do a little run through of the different hues throughout the spring subseasons. On top we have the bright spring, so all of these higher contrast, brighter colors on top. In the middle, true spring, the most juicy, kind of like edible, ripest of all of the seasons. And then light spring, warm but still airy, and the most light of all the spring subseasons. And just remember as you explore different color palettes, different relationships between the colors, know that the palettes you will find online are very generalized and you are an individual with different preferences, different, I would say, access to wearable shades because people are different sizes, different styles that they prefer. So don't get too caught up on getting the color exactly right, try to find colors that look good on you, that make you feel good, that harmonize with you, and also harmonize with your silhouettes. And try to have fun and try to recognize the beauty of all the different colors because they're all absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.